Hi, everyone. I think we're going through good here. Today is Monday, November 9th, and we are officially transitioning from Minnesota history, which even in normal years, we spend almost all of October in. And now we're going to transition to the history of the world. And the goal is that throughout this course, we're really going to try and go through time from the beginning to relatively modern times. Around 1900 is usually when our year ends. So we're going to start from the very beginning of any history that we actually know about what humans did when they got their start. And this entire week is going to be what I like to call the first civs. Now, by civs, it's short for civilization. And we are going to see some things that overlap in terms of what it means for people to finally civilize. Now, the problem is that kind of leads itself to saying that people that were not like them were uncivilized, like they're barbarians, which isn't true. Obviously, groups of people all over the world have their own cultures. But really, the reason that we call these civilized groups, and I put that in quotations, really is because we have a very good record of where they were, what time, and what their lives were like. And in order to illustrate that, I just want to go through a quick diagram, and it's going to be inside of your Google Classroom. So let's get into it. While we're transitioning there, I just want to let you know this is the first day that we've had of school after the news that we are transitioning to full distance learning in the next few weeks, right? So understanding what we're doing and doing things the right way has never been more important, because there are a lot of us that are going to start transitioning to being online all the time for school when we're not used to it. So please make sure that you're following along with these instructions, because I think it's really going to help you, especially once we have to make that transition. Okay. So today we are going to be going into the Google Classroom. I'm going to start from scratch. So we're going to go from my page into classwork. Now, if you go up to today's date, November 9th, there's going to be a drop down, and there's going to be this Google slide. It's just a picture, and it's going to be something that I think would be very helpful for you. So if you want to print it off, great, but it's going to be there for you to access along with the notes from today. But here it is. It's 5 key elements that all civilizations had, and we start to see this during this time. Has a centralized government, which means there's going to be one body making most of the decisions for people, and they're going to usually have a lot of power. Then there's going to be an organized religion or some sort of ritual to pay respect to what they believe to be their creator. There's going to be job specialization and social classes. And to specialize in something means that you do that specific thing, right? Like I specialize in teaching social studies and just being a teacher in general, right? Beforehand, in order to survive, you basically had to do every little task yourself. But now, because we're going to develop what's called a food surplus, because people learn how to grow things, people can focus on doing other things than just getting enough food to survive, right? Probably of the 5 here, the most important one. Then you're going to see artwork. And artwork doesn't always necessarily mean like painting or sculpture. It can be written things. Like the place we talk about today has one of the oldest, if not the oldest, surviving story. Architecture is building, and public works. There are going to be things that are created that people are going to use as a public or as a society. A great example is there's going to be a place we're going to talk about later in the week that had a place called the Great Bath. And it was a place that you could clean yourself. It was a humongous structure. And then the last thing, which I would argue is just up there, it's writing, right? A system of writing and communication, usually to keep records. Okay. So just looking at this here, I'm not exactly sure why. Once again, print this if you can. I had this up here. I must not hit the save button before, so I'm just going to put this in as we go here. You're going to have some notes, and the notes are going to go along with what we're doing in our slides. Now, what you need to do is when you're in these slides, here, I'll just make sure that I schedule this here really quick. Okay. Sorry about that. So when you open up these notes, Layla, be quiet. You're going to see here that they're going to be open-ended notes, kind of like what we've done in the past. And what you can do is you can go ahead, click file, and hit and hit make a copy. And then you will be able to, if you do entire presentation, you will have your own copy that you can fill in the notes as we go. Obviously, I tell you this every time, but I'll tell you again, the best thing you can do is print, and then that way you'll have your own paper copy. And if you want to, you can actually have multiple pages per sheet. So this is going to be 8 slides. If you did 4 pages a sheet, you could have just a front and back of the notes of today. Be super easy to keep track of. Okay. So that's what I recommend. If you do decide that you want to do this, remember, do the split screen, and then you can have the video on the left side here playing because it'll be under November 9th video materials. Okay. All right. So I'm going to get into the real slides. Just letting you know right now, you need to pay attention because some of these slides that are in here, you don't have to take notes on. Okay. So that's the reason why I gave you that smaller slip. So it's up to you to realize where you are and that you're taking the proper notes that you need. Don't do more work than you have to. Okay. All right. So we're going to start out today by talking about ancient Sumer, and this culture is known as the Sumerians. Now, this is going to be in 3300 BC or BCE to about 1900. It's considered probably among, if not the oldest civilization ever. Now, where that's going to be is what we know today as the Middle East. Okay. And it's going to be what we know as Iraq today. At the time would have been known as Mesopotamia. And Mesopotamia basically just means Middle Earth because this was considered to be the middle of the known world at this time. Okay. So it's really going to be focused between these 2 rivers. And as we're going to see, all of these societies that we're going to talk about this week, they're all centered on rivers, all of them. And here they are. And the reason is because rivers, first of all, are fresh water, right? So it allows for sustainability of life. The second thing, they flow and they flood. And when they flood, rivers have these areas of nutrients called silt on the bottom that when it floods, it brings it to the soil and allows for people to continue to grow their own food. Okay. Some of these rivers we're going to talk about, they flood very regularly and people are able to control it. There are going to be some that flood violently and unpredictably. And weirdly enough, it almost seems to have sort of a lasting impact on how these people view the world because these rivers are their lifelines. Okay. So the area that we're talking about today, it's the Fertile Crescent, right? The Fertile Crescent is going to be this area right here. For something to be fertile just means that it's easy to grow, right? So the area, I'm going to refer to it a bunch of times, but this place is called, where Sumer is in the Fertile Crescent. Now, today we know this as a desert, but in the time, this was one of the greenest, most fertile areas in the world because the world temperature was much lower. Mesopotamia, this is going to be the region between the Tigris and the Euphrates River, and that's where Sumer is going to develop. And the ziggurat is going to be a huge, usually public building shaped like a pyramid. It's usually a temple, or it can even be a really large building that people live in. But that's going to be one of those public works buildings we talked about. And then we have cuneiform, which cuneiform is going to be the very first system of writing. And that's where Sumer is going to get its claim to fame. All right, so this should be where we're starting to take notes. So the world's first civilization is called Sumer, that we know of. It's located in Mesopotamia, which is part of the Fertile Crescent, right? So it's Mesopotamia, Middle Earth. Fertile Crescent just refers to the fact that it was very easy to grow things there. Okay. So if you take a look, this is where it was. We have the Mediterranean Sea, which we're going to talk about a lot in the future, because that's where Rome needed to take control. But you have the rivers right here, and anything that's in this green area here, that's where that's where it was easiest to grow food during that time on the earth. Okay. Now, the floods and irrigation is going to be really, really important, right? Because the silt brings the nutrients to the soil that they need. So the Tigris and the Euphrates, they flood a lot, which is great because it brings a lot of nutrients. The problem is that they flood very violently and unpredictably, which puts it in a spot that the people can be kind of afraid of these rivers because if they're not careful, they can actually be deadly. Okay, so the people that live there, they need to try to find a way to control these rivers. And there's really 2 things that they do. And this is where that centralized government comes into place. They're going to want to build dikes, or as we know today as levees, that are going to prevent the water from rising over the top. We see that down in New Orleans. And then we also are going to see ditches dug for irrigation. And what irrigation simply is you are digging, redirecting a river to bring water somewhere that it's not used to, and that'll fertilize the soil around it. Not to mention, it also will bring down the depth of the river and make the flooding a little bit more controllable. All right. And these people are known as innovative, which means they've developed new technologies. Now, Sumer didn't have much timber, even back in those days. It didn't. There was not a lot of wood, but they still needed to find places to live, right? So instead, they used a lot of clay from the soil to make bricks. And those buildings ended up coming in the very first two cities of the world, known as Ur and Uruk. Very creative names, right? Ur and Uruk. They were built almost entirely out of this clay, mud, or brick. And then they're going to be traders because, as you can see, we go back here and take a look. You have a ability to go out into the Persian Gulf. And doing so means that they'll be able to trade with the other ancient river civilizations pretty easily, right? So the fact that they have such easy access to large bodies of water means that they can trade almost anywhere else that's actually developed. All right. So right here, here's another example of it. We're going to talk about this place later on, but this is going to be Egypt. That's going to be tomorrow's area of study. And then this is where Sumer is, right? And you can see in this orange area, this is where they really took off and where most of their sites were. Now I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and about, let's say, a dozen cities. There's really a lot more than this, but the ones that are there are huge. So for this time, like Ur was the biggest one. And Ur was like 30 to 40,000 people in it, maybe even more, depending on what people believe and the records that are kept. That's insane for this time. I know now it's like, ooh, it's only the size of Richfield. Who cares? In those days, that was a lot of people to have in one place. So once again, just going back to the pictures again, taking a look at where our 4 river civilizations are. We're here first, and we'll be jumping over here tomorrow. All right, so they're city-states. So Sumer was divided into at least 12 city-states. What a city-state really is it means that, sure, they're really about the size of what we would consider a normal city today, but they completely have their own cultures and traditions, right? This is not one unified country like the United States of America. Each of these city-states would have seen themselves completely independent, much like when we're going to study Greece later on. And usually how people became powerful is at first they would conquer somebody else, and then that leader would end up becoming very popular, and then after that they would hopefully pass it down through their family, much like the kings and queens that we see up until the 18 and 1900s. All right, so what are they responsible for? And I think this is really important, right? They're going to be responsible for these things right here. I'm sorry, I just have to take a quick drink of soda here. It's parched. So they need to maintain walls. They need to protect their cities, right? They need to continue to build irrigation systems to feed their people. And they need to conduct warfare because part of their reputation is how much they want to expand their area. So continuous military victories is going to be really important. Now, in other river civilizations, that's not true. Like in the Indus Valley, there are a lot of people that believe that they didn't fight at all. And unfortunately, that's probably what ended up being their downfall, is that they weren't prepared for it because they didn't like to fight. Not the case around here. And some people think it's because the fact that they had to deal with that river flooding, that it gave them the perspective that they need to be able to fight at any time. Kings had to enforce laws, make sure people are following them, right? And they're usually very, very strict. They're going to employ scribes, people who can write, to keep records, and they're going to lead religious ceremonies because they want to show the people that they believe that their creators are happy with them doing their job. All right, so there are really 3 what we call social classes, and these are really just groups that people are organized into, right? And this is really simple to describe because there's really only 3. There's a highest level where it's going to be the ruling family, any of their officials, which is usually people are either related to them or friends, and priests. And we're going to see that over time, that priests are almost always going to be in that highest class, no matter what they're broken up into. The middle class, you're going to have priests that are of smaller areas. The writers, the merchants, or the people that sell things, and artisans are people that have a craft, like an artist or a blacksmith or something of that variety. But the lowest class is also going to have the most people in it. And it's also going to be the one that really feeds and takes care of everybody. The lowest class is going to be peasant farmers, either people who own their own land or are given that land to work on by those who are wealthier. And then there are going to be a lot of slaves. And that's one of the reasons why there's so much warfare during this time, because they needed slavery at the time in order to be able to provide enough food for everyone. And the way that you would get those slaves in those days was to fight somebody else. And then if you were the victor, then you would probably take those people as slaves. If it sounds terrible, it is. But is it also a reality of this time? Yes. So this is one of those ziggurat temples that we talked about earlier. Just wanted to give you a good view of it. This actually is the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which is just a very, very specific, beautiful ziggurat. And that actually is going to end up being one of the 7 wonders of the world. But if you were curious as to what it looked like, this is it. It was built in the BC period a little bit later on, but it's still an incredibly important thing to take a look at. Just gorgeous. All right. Now, really, if there's one thing that I want you to remember about ancient Sumer, it's that they invented writing. And it's a writing system that we've actually translated, and it was made way earlier than other civilizations. In fact, it was 3200 BCE, they think, which is over 5,000 years ago. And the reason that they call it cuneiform is because it's shaped like cones or wedges. So what they would do is they would carve these marks on clay tablets using a stylus, which we use stylus today and other things, but it's not like an actual carving tool. Instead, it's something like you'll drag on a touch screen, right? But that's what they did. And it was very time consuming, but at least it allowed them to keep accurate records. And then eventually over time, they wanted to make it more complicated. So there were more symbols that were introduced to make more complex writing systems. But it is the oldest writing that we have that is like some form of an alphabet that at the same time we can translate, which is really, really neat. So this is what cuneiform would have looked like. I believe this is one of the oldest models of it, because it's split into 2 groups. I think because of the very few shapes I see that this is one of the old ones. I can't say that for sure though. All right, so other things. They started developing astronomy and mathematics. They divided the hour into 60 minutes, which is really neat. We obviously still do that today. They divided a circle into 360 degrees, which we still use to this day. And then probably one of the most, besides writing, one of the most well-known things is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is a story about a king who was kind of a jerk early on in his life. And then through a series of adventures with his best friend known as Enkidu, Gilgamesh and Enkidu encounter a whole bunch of different life experiences, and that changes Gilgamesh's worldview, and he ends up becoming a very, very good king for the rest of his life. And I think that there's a lot of people that believe he was real and that this was like a propaganda thing to make him look better than he was. But even if it wasn't, it really shows what people believe that their king should have been back from that time period. So it's very insightful into understanding their culture. And I'll be honest, it's actually a pretty interesting story. I've read the whole thing. It's actually pretty interesting. All right. Sumer, like all civilizations, must come to an end. And as usual in these times, what ends up happening is there are invaders coming in from outside. It starts out small, it gets big, constant warfare with no returns, constant losing eventually causes them to go bankrupt. They don't have any money. They're running out of resources. And eventually, in about 2,400 years after it starts, the Sumerian city-states are going to be run over completely by invaders. However, their achievements are still known today, and a lot of it has to do with the records that they kept in cuneiform. All right, ladies and gentlemen, there you go. That's what we've got for today. Pop on over, take a look at that exit ticket. 5 questions today. All right. Truly believe all of these should be able to be answered through your notes, provided that you took them. Sorry that this video is a little bit longer, but because we're starting a new unit, we obviously had to go into some of the nitty gritty. So I appreciate your patience. All right, I'm going to let you go. Have yourselves a wonderful night. Get those exit tickets done. We'll see you tomorrow to talk about ancient Egypt. Can't wait. Right, Layla? She's overcome with excitement.